Hello and welcome to the Cottage Notebook podcast. I'm your host Nadia, and if you like your craft podcast with a little bit of gardening and creativity on the side, then this is the podcast for you. Coming up on today's show, the wonderful Felicity Ford, aka Knitsonik, joins me to chat about her latest book and finding inspiration for colourwork in your everyday life. So grab your knitting, make that cuppa, and grab some time for you. Hello and welcome to the show. Now, if you're a new listener, come on in and have a nosy around the blog, Ravelry and social media. And if you want to get to know us a little bit better or take part in any of our challenges or creative discussions, then pop over to our Facebook group, which can be found from the Cottage Notebook Facebook page. For returning listeners, it's lovely to have you all back again and joining in with the show. Have you finished that shawl? Did you block those socks? If you remember to pop over to Ravelry or the Facebook group to share them so you can inspire others to try that yarn you loved or that pattern that you have to cast on right away. If you do have time and you like the show, I would love it if you could pop over to iTunes and leave a review so that you could help this podcast reach even more craft-loving people. And please, if you like the episode, if it speaks to you, share it on whatever social media that you use and let us know what you think. And if you want to stay up to date with all things from the Cottage Notebook, then make sure you're signed up to the newsletter, which you can find on cottagenotebook.ie. And I promise this is the last little bit of housekeeping before we start. This week, over on the blog, there is a wonderful interview with Victoria from Eden Cottage Yarns. As well as those stunning yarn images that Eden Cottage is known for, Victoria gives us an insight to her life while running Eden Cottage Yarns. We also take a look at those fabulous Millbourne schemes that she has just recently launched. So if you missed it yesterday, pop over to cottagenotebook.ie, read, and give Victoria some of your precious time. Now, today's episode of this podcast is sponsored by This Is Knit, and they kindly allowed myself and Felicity to record on location during her workshops in Dublin. During the podcast, you can hear the hustle and bustle of the gorgeous Powers Court townhouse, but if anything, I think it adds depth to the interview. So, without giving anything away, I could spend hours talking to Felicity, and we really only graced the top of the things that I would like to talk about with her. So, I am going to step back and leave you with the wonderful Felicity Ford. Hi Felicity, how are you? Thank you so much for coming on the show, and could you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Thanks very much for having me. I'm Felicity Ford, also known as Felix, and I do all my projects under the Knitsonik moniker because I work with knitting and with sound. Knit plus sonic, hence Knitsonik, and I don't know what more to. We'll probably get to what that looks like in the rest of the interview, but yeah, I principally am interested in celebrating everyday life through the medium of sound and the medium of knitting.
And you are over here in This Is Knit, about to do a full day workshop with some very lucky people on Saturday. So can you tell us a little bit more about what's coming up on that?
I'm super excited. We're doing the quotidian colourwork class, which is my favourite class to teach. And basically in the class, people will bring an inspiration source, that's something, anything that is significant to them. And then we will spend the whole day swatching, developing stranded colourwork from that inspiration source. So we'll find the palette that they'll work with, we'll find the patterns that they knit, and we'll find the shading schemes just by really looking into their inspiration source. And it's always really, really fun because the different things people bring are just amazing. I had somebody who, there's a video online actually, she decided to work from her sneakers. She had this new pair of sneakers, and she was like, on the morning of the workshop, she was like, oh, I didn't bring an inspiration source, but it's cool because I have these new sneakers and they're amazing. And so you get like that kind of thing, and then you get people being like, here's this really incredible kind of family heirloom passed down from like my grandmother, or like here's a photo from this incredible holiday I had. And I always love seeing what inspires people, and the process of drawing out of that inspiration something that maybe one day they could wear. That's kind of a really nice, I think that's my favourite thing, the potential of the workshop to kind of go on, because obviously we don't have time to design and make a whole garment, but it kind of starts that process going and breaking down that kind of demystifying the creative process, really. So making each step of it completely manageable. And I love teaching it. It's always loads of fun, and it's always just beautiful.
And the workshop became inspired from your book, is that right?
It's actually, so the book is a sort of expansion of the workshop, because what happened was I was invited to be the patron of Shetland Wool Week in 2013, I think, and Misha said to me, would you like to do any workshops? Like, you should have a think about what workshops you'd like to do. And I was like, well, I've been noodling with this idea for years of I want to translate everyday inspirations into stranded colour work. So I said, I'm going to teach a workshop on that, which is a really good way to make sure that you know how to do something, is if you offer to teach people it in several months' time. And I had been doing some kind of stuff with it, and I had some ideas about where I'd start, but that deadline really gave me a focus. And then I taught that initial workshop in Shetland, and we had this great time together. And then afterwards I was just we didn't even cover anything. We touched the tip of the iceberg of what this subject could be. And I said to a couple of people who'd been in the class, I was like, what do you think? I'm wondering if I should maybe develop a book from this. And I had very positive reactions to that, because I sort of wanted a book that would teach me how to do this. And it didn't exist in the format that I wanted. And so that was the start of it. And I said to my husband, hey, I'm thinking about making this book. And he was like, listen, I'm not seeing you put your tiny, meagre amount of artist money into a book that nobody wants. So we talked about it, and we were like, maybe if I do a crowdfunder, then that will first of all help me to gauge whether anyone else wants the book, and also raise the money to make it happen. So then the book was crowdfunded, and the reaction to the crowdfunder was completely amazing. People were really so supportive and so excited to be part of it. And through the process of publicising it and publicising the Kickstarter campaign and sort of communicating with people about it online, I got a lot of feedback from the knitting community about what sort of book this needed to be. And then after, I think it was 447 amazing backers, made the project happen, and the book came out in October 2014 and completely changed my life. So that's kind of the relationship between the book and the workshop. And I still, I don't go every year, but I have gone back to Shetland quite a few times and taught the class. And it's always bringing it back to its spiritual home. I always just feel because the other thing about this idea of translating everyday inspirations into stranded colour work, for me, one of the things that was deeply inspiring and moving about going to Shetland in the first place was the deeply embedded, emplaced sense of textiles there. There's a very deep sense of place, and there's a sense of heritage, and this is our textile tradition. And I didn't want to just lift that and be like, oh, now it's mine, and be like, I'll just take all those stars, and it feels like it's such a emplaced tradition. And then I thought, I've kind of lived in lots of different places during my life, and I can't lay claim to any one place, and I can't say this is my home, and I can't say this is my textile tradition, this is where I'm from. And actually I thought, I wonder if there are creative processes that could give me still a strong sense of belonging in the things that I knit. And I bet other knitters feel that way about where they live, now that we have this very kind of globalised world and people move around a lot. So I think that was kind of a strong idea for me. Is how do you make your own textile tradition that speaks to where you live and where you are in the world? And hence the Knitsonik system and the Knitsonik Stranded Colourwork Sourcebook.
And just because you have mentioned Shetland Wool Week in 2018, you also did the Listening to Shetland wool as well. Can you tell us about that whole project? How it
So,
came about? And...
yeah, so I went to, that was the other thing that I did for Shetland Wool Week that year, was I was just thinking about what could I do, how can I speak to this incredibly embedded textile tradition, and I was thinking about sound and how I'd done a few projects prior to that were about using sound to explore a sense of place in textiles. So I did a residency in Estonia that was looking at the relationship between kind of the Estonian textile history and also the sort of sonic textures of the Estonian landscape. And I had done a project in the Lake District as well. And I had been just kind of noodling with this idea of like, if we listen to the places and the people from which textiles come, what does that do for our understanding, our appreciation of those textiles? And so in the Lake District, I just had this kind of, I was there in January and I was just going from one farm to another, and it was like so windy up on the fell, and I just got tons of recordings of wind and kind of gates creaking in the wind and walking through muddy puddles. And there was this kind of, actually when I listened back to all the recordings, I was like, now I understand the fleece of the Herdwick sheep, now I understand the fleece of the Swaledale sheep, now I understand the rough fell, like these really sturdy kind of incredible kempy thick fleeces that they just sing of this landscape of the stone and the wind. And I just was like, okay, this is like, I want to see, does this have any application in other places, or am I just imagining it? And when it came to Shetland, how I researched that project listening to Shetland Wool was I wrote to loads of people in Shetland and asked them about their sonic impressions of the landscape. And Sarah Lawrenson actually sent me this amazing email that was just all about sounds that were important to her and that made her think of Shetland. And then I listened to all these oral histories that were about, they're in the Toba and Dolcus archives. I just listened to all these Shetlanders speaking in their own words about all these different things to do with like stuff like supplementing the sheep's diet with seaweed and kind of the significance of various patterns and the process of marking sheep with tar, all these different kind of things. And that gave me a really clear idea of these are things that I need to record. And like I had experiences, like I think one of the things that struck me most about Shetland as a distinctive place is that you can never hear sheep separate from the sound of seabirds. And actually when you look at the kind of the dual income of crofting that produced all that incredible knitwear in the Shetland Museum and Archives, you're looking at an income of fishing and knitting, and it's there in the sounds as well, because all you can hear is like the seabirds and the sheep. And there's this kind of idea about places having a sonic texture and the relationship between a sense of place and the textiles that come from that place. And I think that's something I'm continually investigating in my work.
And where did your love of textiles originate then?
You know, I was thinking about that, and actually I think one of the strongest experiences I had was here in Ireland. There's a woman called Judith Hode who wrote a book called This is Donegal Tweed, and she's a herbalist. And when I was like 19 or 20, I very briefly participated and did not complete her herbalism course. And she was, at the time, like you'd go into her house. She had this kind of studio where the students studying herbalism would stay, and she had her kind of house, and if you had a question or something, you'd go up to the house. And she was spinning. She had a spinning wheel, and she was spinning, and she was making her own socks. And she was kind of talking, we often talked about the beneficial properties of wool socks and how if you've got cold feet, it's because you haven't got wool socks. And I think that, and her reading her whole experience about how she moved to Donegal and then produced this book, This is Donegal Tweed, and got to know the entire kind of community by interviewing all these weavers who it was like at the tail end of a kind of cottage industry of tweed production in Donegal. And I think I was just really inspired by her passion for this native textile production in Donegal. And so that was, and there was also there were a couple of hippies who were staying with her at some point, Brenda and Kayla, or it's Brendan and Kayla, I think. Anyway, these two young Australians were staying with Judith, and we kind of struck up a bit of a friendship, and they had a fleece and a spindle that Brendan had made, and they taught me how to drop spindle, and it was like nothing like how we drop spindle now, where we've all got like a Bosworth and, you know, amazing beautiful dyed tops. This was just like a fleece covered in sheep poo in a like kind of bin bag, you know, that had been in their van as they'd been like driving all around Ireland. And yeah, and then they sort of, when they left to go back to Australia, they just gifted me this bag of fleece, and I, from memory, I think I spun it all into this like really dodgy single, and someone had told me I could dye with onion skins, but I had no idea about quantities or anything, and I made all this like really brittle yarn because I put too much alum in, and so I suppose that was a kind of the formative thing, and then I just kept thinking about textiles and how they're so embedded in everyday life, and they're all so incredibly special, and an enormous amount of craft goes into their production. And I actually, when I first went to Dunleary to do my undergraduate degree, I had it in mind. The vision that I had when I signed up for that course was that I wanted to make a film. I wanted to learn how to make a film, and the film was just going to be all about the thread of life. And it was like, it's a really cheesy, like classic kind of A-level art project idea, but I had this vision in mind of like a film that would start with like a single thread, and it would show all the ways that filament goes out and becomes part of the fabric of our lives. And yeah, I never made that film, but I think the image of that has somehow kind of, it's just been there somehow in the back of all the work I've produced since then.
That's amazing.
I'm just rambling here. I hope it's okay.
It's amazing listening to you. And the thing that I was going to ask was then, can you tell us about your journey from your degree to what you do now? Because it's been quite a lot. It's been over a decade, and you have achieved quite a lot. You have exhibits with the Oxford Museum, you've done work with Tate Modern, which is amazing, by the way, and the Charles Dickens Museum as well. So can you kind of tell us how, starting from Dunleary and ending up doing that with almost having your second book out now this year, so how did that all happen?
So when I was at Dunleary, I was doing my undergraduate degree. There were a couple of things that I think kind of stuck. So it was a really nice, the course was really like, you sort of did everything, a bit of everything in the first year, and then you specialised in the second year. And I specialised into digital. Like, I decided I want to look at digital art, and like the web was kind of in its infancy. It was not the thing it is now. And so this would have been like 2000, 2001. So I was doing all this kind of HTML and coding and making these little websites, and I found a book in the library called Zeros and Ones by Sadie Plant, and it is a really dense kind of academic read, but it's looking at the relationship between coding and jacquard loom weaving and textile production and maths and all of these things, and I found that all really exciting, and I really enjoyed, like, I got really inspired by that, and so I was happy going away and making all this little HTML websites with little bits of video and little bits of pictures and stuff. And then we were asked to do a sound map, we were given a task to make a map, and we had to pick a place that was important to us, and we had to document it in some way, and we had to make a website. And I just immediately thought of the Glen of the Downs, which is a road protest site that is the reason I came to Ireland in the first place. In 1997, I moved here to live on a road protest site to stop the widening of the N11 through the nature reserve at the Glen of the Downs. And I was not very good at living in trees, and I didn't last very long on the actual camp, but it was a very formative kind of time. Like, it was an amazing experience to leave home at the age of 18 with like I didn't know anybody. I had like 20 quid, I had a rucksack, I had a flute, I had a mandolin, I had crystals, I had a hippie kit, basically, stripy jumper, and And so I had gone to this place, but my strongest memory, and this is why it came up in this assignment years later at Dunleary, when they said, make a map of a place that's significant to you. I immediately wanted to work with sound and make a map of the Glen of the Downs, because the sound was extraordinary in that place, because the kind of protest mentality, the fact that we were at war with the road, we did not want the road, was so exaggerated by, when I was there, the camp was lower than the level of the road, and it always sounded like the lorry was going to career off and just run over you. It was so like terrifying and also thrilling, and it was a constant reminder of like this, I suppose, our soft mortal kind of animal bodies versus this like incredibly fast modern Celtic tiger road. And then at about 3 o'clock in the morning, this crazy thing would happen where I'd always get woken up, because there was no traffic, and the stream that runs through the glen that you can never hear during the day would suddenly like rise to my consciousness. And because you're sleeping and your brain's still registering sounds, this sound would kind of suddenly register as a weird sound, and I'd wake up and I'd just be lying in the treehouse listening to the stream. So I was like, I have to go to Glen of the Downs, I have to record all the traffic, I have to record the stream. And so sort of began my work with sound. And also I think around that time, between sort of the age of 19 and my early 20s, I had the onset of psoriatic arthritis, which I've had ever since. And I just got really kind of interested in, when you're in pain a lot and you're kind of immobilized a lot, I just got really interested in my body, but more the experience of being inside it rather than what do I look like from the outside. It was like a very interior kind of, interior reading on the world, and working with sound really spoke to that, because like if you think about somebody whispering in your ear, it has this sense of touch or physicality about it, whereas I think you're not aware of sound waves touch it, or you're not aware of light waves touching your eyes. So there was this very kind of tactile, sensory body kind of thing going on, and I ended up my final piece and also in that kind of phase of life, I struck up a friendship, a really important friendship, with another woman who also has a disability, and she has less than 5% of usable sight. My friend is older, and we just had this beautiful creative friendship together where we would do loads of cabaret performances, and we would like go to art galleries, and we would go to like the opera or the ballet or something, and I would be telling her what's going on, and then we would like listen to audiobooks all the time at her place. Whenever I stayed, we'd listen to audiobooks, and I just realized that picture that I had in my own head from listening to the audiobook was so good, and I was like, I want to make worlds that will speak to that interior imagination of the person that I'm like, of the audience. So that was kind of the start of it. And my final piece at Dunleary was a little selection of sound pieces that are all little stories, but they've got lots of field recordings mixed in with them, and they were all ostensibly about animals, but they weren't really about animals. They were about being a human animal, I suppose. So there was like a monkey and a whale. There's a piece about a whale, there was a piece about a lioness. They're all just really stories about being a young woman and coming to terms with the world. So that's kind of how I stumbled into working with sound. And then I knew I had to move back to the UK because at the end of my degree, I was on an insane amount of painkillers, an insane amount of steroids, and I was just like, if you take steroids long term, they just start to disintegrate your skeleton. So I was just really on a very unsustainable plan for managing my arthritis, and I wasn't coping very well, and I didn't have good tools. So I decided I'm going to move back with my parents. I'm going to regroup. I'm going to figure out the next step, and I just need a better strategy for surviving that isn't just necking steroids and codeine and coffee. So that's kind of what I did. And I also so with Dunleary, I always think this, the journey of how you end up doing the thing that you're doing, it's always chance encounters, and it's so improvised. Like, no one starts out with a plan like, I'm going to work with knitting and sound. It always is just about things slipping into place at the right moment. And I was invited down to Cork. There was this amazing kind of sound art festival there, and they wrote to our university and said, no, they wrote to Dunleary and they said, have you got anybody who's working with sound who might want to represent some work? And Jeffrey Perrin, my amazing, super encouraging kind of tutor, said, oh yeah, you should totally go. And so he sent me down to this thing in Cork, and I showed my work there, and I met there a guy called Neil C. Smith, who's an artist who works with sound, and he does lots of really interesting stuff with coding. And he was like just singing the praises of this interdisciplinary arts course at Oxford Brookes University. I don't think the interdisciplinary arts MA exists anymore, but he told me about it, and I was like, this is awesome. This is made for me, because I've never been able to specialise in just one thing. I was like, so if I do the interdisciplinary arts MA, I can do visual arts, I can do writing, I can do sounds, I can do all of the things I'm interested in, and I won't have to, like, I don't have to make it be super specific. So I applied to go there on the basis of Neil C. Smith's rave review that he gave this course. And then I moved to Oxford. I think it was just a year later, to begin my MA. And when I moved to Oxford, I was like, I don't have any friends here, and where am I going to meet the quality women? and you know, I can't live without like my girlfriends. So I started thinking, where might I meet people who I will get on with? And I think I was just looking on the internet, and I saw that there was a knitting group, the Oxford Blue Stockings, and I went along, and I was completely entranced by the world of the Oxford Blue Stockings. Everyone was being like really, there were just these brilliant women who all worked for the Oxford University Press, and they had these and one, like someone was working in the gaming industry. They all had these wicked jobs, and they were like doing super technical knitting projects, and like having a big heated discussion about, you know, the best way to do a toe up or a toe down sock or something, and someone's making lace, and I like literally went in with this beginner how to make like a Battenberg kind of like super entry level knitting project, and I was quite kind of intimidated, but I sort of went a few times, and then over time some of those friendships are just cemented into like the, you know, like, so Lara, who founded the Oxford Blue Stockings, she was my maid of honour when I got married last year. Like Liz, who's one of the Oxford Blue Stockings, has a pattern in the second book. Like, they're, you know, it's still kind of, we're all still super connected. So so that's kind of, and it was a really interesting time because I was learning about knitting and getting really excited about knitting, and at the same time also learning more about experimental sound art and what to do, like all the different ways you can manipulate sound and frame sound and present sound to audiences. So I did my MA, and then I still had loads of stuff that I wanted to do with sound, so then I did a PhD. So I don't know which bits to talk about, because I could just go on and on, but
will make it a little easier for you. Out of all of the things that you have achieved in the last decade, what is your favourite, or what are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of in the last decade? I don't even know where to start with that. I think that producing the first book, the Knitsonik Stranded Colourwork source book, was pretty exciting. Like, that was probably the thing and the thing that I'm most proud of that is that actually, like, in terms of feedback that I get, I love that I get little messages on Twitter and little messages on Ravelry saying I can't stop seeing inspiration everywhere. Like, I'm at the bus stop and I'm looking and I can see this, and I love the kind of, like, I think what I'm most proud of, if the thing that I've done is make things that felt boring and unspecial feel more special and worthy of celebration, then I'm proud of that. I think that's probably, yeah.
It's a really nice gift to give people. A gift of inspiration. That is a good gift. It's a really beautiful book. When you were pulling this book together, what was the most difficult part for you? Because people struggle at different points with pulling a body of work together.
I have to say, right, that because it was crowdfunded, I had this really amazing community that were really engaged with the process, and I felt really, really accountable to them because, you know, they've given me all this funding to make this thing happen. And I felt really, it was so utterly clear to me how I wanted to do it. And it has a very clean structure. It's like things, places, plants, and it kind of, and I really also was very clear that I just want to concentrate on swatching, even though, like, it's a knitting book and are people going to complain because it's not completely full of garment patterns. But it was just very clear. And I think because I had that ongoing communication with the backers, who was so generous and so supportive and so engaged with the kind of project, it wasn't, it was a lot of work, but I didn't feel uncertain about it or kind of, or have a crisis of confidence with it or anything like that. I just was really, I think it was a really hairy moment when I was up in Shetland for Wool Week and the first copies that I'd seen arrived, and I just had this, like, this massive feeling of emotion of, like, what if I open it and I don't like it? What if I open it and it's awful? And I was having kind of dreams of like that exact thing happening, like opening the book and it's all nonsense, and you know, so that was kind of, there was just that moment, and I think I felt a little bit like I had not expected the Kickstarter campaign to get so much traction. I had not expected people to be so involved, so kind, so generous. I had not expected people to be this excited about the book, and then there was this kind of trepidation, like, is it gonna live up to people's expectations? Is it gonna be good? Like, are people gonna be like, oh, this isn't what I thought she was gonna make at all? Or are people gonna be like, this is exactly the book that, you know, we wanted? So yeah, so there was kind of some pressure involved, but actually the kind of creative process of pulling it together was just a joy, really. I had a beautiful time making that book.
And in comparison, the second book, which isn't out, but it is coming out soon. Can you tell us about that?
The difficult second album. No, so I really wanted to... so this book came out in 2014, and then since then I've done quite a lot of teaching at the Edinburgh Yarn Festival and at Shetland Wool Week, and various other kind of places. Like, I did a workshop in Amsterdam just before Christmas, so I've done quite a bit of teaching, and the same issues come up again and again and again, and I thought I would really like to make, like, in a way, so this book the first book takes you through the creative process and breaks down finding a palette, finding patterns, finding a shading sequence, and it kind of walks you through that process. And I wanted to kind of do a book that spoke to the next bit, that's like, okay, so now you've got your amazing swatch and it's got all your beautiful things in it. What are you going to do with it? To what will you apply that? And so, yeah, so I thought a lot about making a sequel that would speak to issues that come up frequently in workshops and giving people next steps for, like, once you've done the swatch, where do you go from that? And kind of also the community that has grown around the Knitsonik Stranded Colourwork sourcebook is a completely amazing community, and are doing amazing stuff with the ideas in the book. And I wanted to speak to that. So there are patterns in there by other people. I'm not going to say who, because it's still kind of a surprise, but there are patterns in there from Knitsonik comrades, and there are kind of, yeah, there are things in there that actually, it's just that I've kind of said, listen, let's put something in the book, but really it's come from the Knitsonik community, it's not come from me. And so I'm really excited about that, because it still has it has a real community flavour about it. And then, yeah, the patterns have just been, I just really wanted to give people a lot of different canvases that you can put your amazing, totally highly personal stranded colourwork onto, and that's what the second book is all about.
Is there a date for that coming out?
I've got the proofs with me while I'm hearing that, like the final proofs. And yeah, so I'm hoping that in the next few weeks, I don't want to say a date exactly yet, but I will be doing a trunk show at the Edinburgh Yarn Festival with all of the samples on the Sunday event that's just been announced now, so I'm allowed to talk about it. But yes, so yeah.
Excellent. I'm excited. You can't see, but I'm like waving around here like a lunatic, very excited.
You have perfected the art of being silently excited, which is a really important skill as a podcast producer. People don't realise as well how difficult that is, because your impulse is to be like, yay, I'm so excited. But then you're all over the audio, and then when you come to edit it, you're like, oh, I was being excited all over them speaking. So you have perfected the art of the silent excitement of the podcaster.
You have been talking about community, and one of my great loves at the moment is Instagram, and I'm in no way silent about that. I'm like talking about Instagram all the time, and I have to say your Tarmac Tuesdays and the community around that is just brilliant. I absolutely love it. I think it's great. I fell down the hole earlier today when I was looking back over things, and I lost like 45 minutes when I was supposed to actually be researching. Ken, how did that all come about? How did that start?
45 minutes on Tarmac Tuesdays is 45 minutes well spent.
But I would go like down, and then I would like get drawn into another image and go like, oh yeah, what was I doing? And then go back, and it was just...
They're so good. So that came about because, so in the first book, Knitsonik Stranded Colourwork Sourcebook, there is a swatch that is based on the A4074 road. And I also made a radio show about the A4074 road as part of my PhD. Again, still on this theme of celebrating the everyday and elevating the everyday. And I just suddenly realised, like, I've just been driving on this A road between Reading, where I live, and Oxford, where I study, for like years and years, all the way through doing an MA and all the way through doing a PhD. And I was like, but I've never hung out in this space. Like, I don't know it. I don't, and yet I've spent all these hours of my life on it. So I did this whole radio show about it. And then I decided that right, when I committed to doing the book, I was like, this is one of my biggest inspiration sources. I need to make a swatch that's based on the A4074 road. And then I was just like, I was completely overwhelmed, because it's 24 miles long, and I have about 10 million photos of all the different views in all the different seasons, like limitless colour options, limitless possibilities. And I just was like, I feel the pressure now, because I've committed to this. This is going in the book. This is one of the chapters. I have to sort this out. I have to make a decision, and I have to think through, how am I going to condense this massive road? And so I had gone, and it was like, I was driving around frantically, stopping in lay-bys, looking, just thinking, observing, being like, what is the essence of this road? Like, how can I edit? I have to edit. And then I just realised, like, all the tarmac is different colours. Like, it's not the same here as it was, 5 miles back up the road. It's not the same where it is 10 miles. And then that was it. Like, then I was just on a mission, and I went from start to finish of that road, just photographing all the different nuances of tarmac. And my poor husband just came home, and every surface was covered in photos of tarmac. And I was just like, observe the tarmac, look at the amazing colours, there's so many different colours in the tarmac. And he just was like, just laughing and being like, this is what it's like to be with an artist. And so at the Edinburgh Yarn Festival, Joe and Mika had asked me to kind of do some sort of stand up, talk about my book, mash-up thing. And I was just recounting this ridiculous story of the tarmac photos and the tarmac Tuesdays. And then I had this kind of joke prize that was like it was framed photos of tarmac. So Gemma Dudley and Coranda Berry were there, and I think Gemma picked up, in fact, the person who won the Tarmac Tuesdays framed photos, I think just was like, I'm not taking that back with me. And so Gemma like adopted it and was like, the two of them just cooked up this plan. They were like, Tarmac Tuesdays, on Tuesdays, everybody go on Instagram and like take pictures of tarmac and upload them. And so they had they'd taken the whole essence of this ridiculous, first of all, massive radio project, then second of all, massive swatching project, and they just spotted a way for other people to participate very simply, very beautifully in it. And the creativity of people engaging with it is amazing. Like the way people frame the shot, the angle they take, the way that they position different elements in, like each one just looks like a kind of Rothko. They're like, it's such a beautiful celebration of something that is universally just regarded as ugly and horrible, and like a symbol of, you know, how badly wrong modern life has gone. Even though, you know, we might not want to look at it because like we would much prefer to have a nice flat lay, like my life is about lattes and stickers, but actually like most of our life is spent not in that. And I think that's what I love about Tarmac Tuesdays. I think like it's genius. I'm so grateful to Coranda and Gemma for coming up with such a beautiful way for people to celebrate the everyday.
And again, another gem to come out of Edinburgh Yarn Festival. There's
Yes.
so many of them.
Yes. It's a magical place where beautiful things are born.
The other question I was going to ask is, I was having a look on your website and you have a beautiful pattern for later in Jameson and Smith.
No, so later is worked in, I think, 7 different types of British breed double knit yarn from Blacker Yarns. The woolly
My
wool's.
notes are covered by the Knitsonik book. So how did, what inspired later?
It was actually going to Woolfest in 2009, I think. A gang of us, again, Oxford Blue Stockings, met up with Kate and Tom, Kate Davies, and we were all camping on Buttermere, and we were like just going, we just had this kind of collective epiphany when we were looking at, so Kate was already designing, and she was using a lot of very small producers, British breed. She did a lot of stuff with Beaumont Braff when you could get this Beaumont Braff, and she had, like, she was definitely kind of already on that trajectory that she's on, that so much now, of looking at local yarns and particularly kind of Scottish yarns and stuff. And but for like me, I think I just had a growing realization that the yarn that you buy in like John Lewis or something, you just don't know, like it could have been grown in China, it could have been grown in Australia, who knows where it's come, like how it's been processed, and its provenance is very, very murky. And I think when I just went to Woolfest, I remember, have you ever been to Woolfest? It's in a huge auction mart, and they have pens everywhere with the sheep, so you can totally see, this is the sheep, this is where, you know, the wool has come from. And I remember sitting with this woman who had Shetland sheep there, and she confided in me that she doesn't really care to knit. She doesn't like knitting, she's not really into it. What she likes is walking on the hills with her sheep. And then she kept showing me these postcards and be like, that's my flock of sheep, that's my flock of sheep. And I was so moved by like the by her connection to these animals and how much she obviously loved them, and the landscape where she was raising this wool. And I think we had just kind of been going around and speaking to all these different producers, and they all just had such a strong story of provenance. And I also became really aware, like I grew up in Croydon and didn't really live in the countryside ever, and it's the first time that I'd walked past and seen there's a Manx Lochtan, there's a Jacob, there's a Rough Fell, there's a Herdwick, and they just took on this kind of mythical significance, like the different breeds and even their names and stuff. I was just really inspired by it. And then the shearing demonstrations where you just see a skillful shearer. It's the way they take the fleece off all in one piece. And so so later is the culmination of those ideas. Like I went to the Blacker yarn stand and saw all that they had yarns that had the sheep names on, the same sheep that I'd just been looking at in the pens. And I was like, they said, "Oh, can we post the yarn to you later?" And I'm like, "No, I will take it with me now." And I just wanted to go back to the campsite with my hoard of like British breed, all different types of yarn. And I did indeed go back to the campsite with my yarn and rolled around in it in my tent, and then just thought a lot about how can I make a garment that looks like the way the fleece comes off the sheep all in one piece, and that speaks to all those different breeds. So I came up with this kind of ombre garter stitch using sneaky grafting to make it look seamless. That's the story with the later design.
And Sue is so inspiring as well when she's speaking about the fleece. I can completely understand your like, I'm taking it with me now.
I'm taking it now.
I did exactly the same thing. I heard her speak, went straight to Blacker Yarns, left with the tomorrow. So yeah, she's a lovely, lovely lady.
She's amazing, and she's so knowledgeable, and she has a really beautiful little flock of sheep, and she's really knowledgeable about fibre and fibre preparation, and she's very generous. She's always been like a very generous supporter of different projects that I've been involved with, and yeah, I think I just was really smitten by the fact that these were breed specific yarns that speak to all these different breeds of sheep. And I think I was just kind of high on the wool fumes of walking around and seeing all the sheep and hearing the sheep and smelling the sheep, and you become really aware at Woolfest that like this comes from land, this comes from animals. And I think you can forget that sometimes in the kind of sanctity of like your living room with a perfectly washed, scoured, dyed skein of yarn. You can forget that.
I think the appreciation though is growing, especially with the rise of hand dyers, of just how much work goes into getting you the yarn in your hands. And I think that's one of the things that I love about the craft community, is that they do want to know more, and when they are buying yarn, they're now asking where it came from and how it was processed and how it was dyed. Like I've had people ask, are they like just specifically for natural dyed commercial yarn? And but yeah, I actually really love that people they're more aware, they're shopping more smart, and I think that's something that I truly love. So where can people find you?
At Knitsonik.com, and it's KNITSONIK.com. Please don't spell Knitsonic with a C at the end. It's like Kodak or Xerox. K at the front, K at the end. Knitsonic.
And in appearances this year, you are in Dublin this weekend, but this will go live just after.
Okay.
And you are at Edinburgh Yarn Festival.
That's right, I'm teaching.
Any other plans this year?
I have got plans this year.
That you can talk about.
I actually am mostly excited this year about like all of the stuff to do with the second book. Like I know that there'll be a lot of work involved with just telling people about that book, getting that book to people who want the book, and another project that I'm working on right now is for the Museum of English Rural Life. I'm producing a small series of little workshops that are kind of the epitome of what I do, in that in each workshop we'll knit something very small. It's a sort of 3-hour long workshop out of a specific yarn, and there will be sounds to listen to during the workshop, and we'll use the whole situation of sitting together, knitting, listening to the sounds to kind of see what comes up, and then I'll record what people experienced or what they thought about during that, and then that will become a sound piece. So there's 4 workshops and they're all happening in March. Every weekend, apart from the one where I'm obviously in Edinburgh for the Edinburgh Yarn Festival, I will be teaching at the Museum of English Rural Life, and those workshops are free to attend, but you have to book. Places are like extremely limited, and and that's part of a research project, a really interesting research project that they're doing at the Museum of English Rural Life, looking at the relationship between the object collection and the intangible cultural heritage of craft. I hope I've explained that properly, but it's like an Arts Council England supported project at Museum of English Rural Life. So I'm working on that. That's something that's kind of, and I'm really excited because it's another opportunity to, like, obviously I've just been working on the second book and that's taken up a lot of brain power, and I haven't done so much stuff with sound recently, and so I'm really excited about that. And I have been making, actually, I say I haven't done that much stuff with sound. I've been working on a sound map with the Museum of English Rural Life that's looking at Reading through a whole series of sounds that represent, Reading has a sort of interesting identity as a place. Like, it's kind of a town, but it's very rural as well. Like, you can just go very easily out and you're in the countryside. So it has this kind of town and country atmosphere, and I've been working with sound to kind of record that and putting it together on a map. And all those sounds will be available for like anybody to use or download, as long as they kind of reference back to the Museum of English Rural Life. So yeah, that's kind of some of the stuff I've been doing, mostly the book, and still looking at the relationship between the textiles that we like to knit with and their provenance in the landscape.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Felicity. It's lovely to get to chat to you, and come back when your book is out so we can talk more about that.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back, and I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'm sure that you could tell that I would love to spend hours chatting to Felicity, and we hardly touched on any of her passions. So please pop over to Knitsonik.com to find out more about her. And if there's anything that we were talking about in today's show that you would like to find out further information on, you can also check out today's show notes, which, as always, can be found on cottagenotebook.ie/listen. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm your host, Nadia, and this is the Cottage Notebook Podcast. Grow, craft, love. Bye-bye.